There are conversations without a single harsh word, no arguments at all. But when you walk away, you feel smaller, as if you had just apologized, simply for daring to be yourself. You try to understand. You tell yourself this is family, an old friend, someone who once stood beside you when you were fragile. And so, you stay, even though deep down, your heart has long wanted to leave. But the truth is, not every relationship is worth keeping. Some people don't hurt you with words. They just quietly wear you down with their indifference, broken promises, or the way they make you feel too sensitive. Stoic philosophy never encourages abandonment, but it teaches us this: peace is not something others grant, it's something you must learn to guard with awareness. In this video, I'll walk with you through 10 quiet but dangerous signs, helping you recognize the kinds of relationships that silently erode your spirit, even when they wear the face of family. If there's a moment that makes you feel, "This is me," leave a comment below with the words, "Enough." And don't take your eyes off the final chapter, because it's the sign most often ignored, but the one that causes people to lose themselves the longest. 1. You can't be yourself around them. There are relationships that make you afraid to laugh too loudly, afraid to speak the truth, afraid to let your heart echo the way it naturally would. You still smile, still talk, still nod. But deep down, something in you shrinks, as if you're quietly folding yourself to fit into the shape that other person expects. At first, you think it's maturity, a way to keep the peace, a form of love. But then you start trimming away the things that once made you whole, your voice, your feelings, your passions, even the thoughts that were still taking form. And in trying so hard to be more agreeable, you begin to disappear from your own life. Anna once loved writing, not to share, not for money, but simply to exist. She wrote in her notebooks about small things, unnamed emotions. Writing was her way of breathing. But ever since she moved in with her boyfriend, the one she once believed to be her rock, Anna began writing less and less. Not because she ran out of ideas, but because every time he saw her with a pen, he'd glance over and smile. A cold, condescending kind of smile. "More dreamy nonsense," he'd say. No one forbade her from writing. But Anna started waiting until he was asleep. Then she switched to typing on her phone, then stopped writing altogether. She quietly folded a part of her identity, all because of the gaze of someone she once called home. This kind of control needs no yelling, no obvious boundaries. It's just vague enough to make you think you're the problem. So you start to adjust, to go silent, to step back. No one tells you to change, but you change because you're afraid that if you don't, you'll no longer be loved. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." It's not a command, it's a reminder. You don't need to become anyone else. You just need to stop betraying yourself. Robin Williams, the legendary comedian, once made the entire world laugh. But behind the laughter, he hid years of living under the weight of always being cheerful, always positive, always loved. He once said, "I used to think the worst thing in life was to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing is to end up with people who make you feel alone." And when there was nothing left to hide, he began to choose differently. Roles with more depth, less spotlight, but more truth. He opened up about his depression, allowed others to see him not okay, and that, more than anything, brought him back to himself before it was too late. You don't have to be famous to go through something like this. You just have to be honest with yourself. Is there something you used to do out of love, but stopped doing because of someone's gaze? Is there a part of you that once burned brightly, but was quietly folded away, just so you could stay in a relationship? If you have to trade your identity to keep someone, what's left of you? 2. They constantly compare, belittle, and make you doubt your worth. You've just achieved something you've worked hard for over a long time, a milestone that felt big enough to be recognized. But instead of congratulations, they simply nod. Not bad, but I once knew someone who did it faster than that. Not terrible, but at your age, it should have been more by now. Those words don't have to be harsh. They just need the right timing and the right person to turn your pride into a moment of quiet self-doubt. At first, you try harder, do better, run farther. But strangely, the more you do, the smaller you feel. Not because you lack ability, but because you always feel slower, lesser, later than someone else. And then, what you do no longer comes from love, but from the hope of being seen. A race with no finish line, where falling one step behind makes you feel worthless. Alex is a software engineer in his 30s, disciplined and responsible. By day, he works. At night, he quietly builds a personal finance platform, a small project he's cherished for years. Not to become famous, but because he believes it might help someone live more consciously. When the first demo was done, he had nearly stayed up 7 nights in a row. That evening, he opened his laptop and turned the screen toward his wife, who was reading a book. "Could you take a look? I just finished the first part." She looked up, glanced at it, then said, "Looks fine, but there are so many startups like this out there. My friends raised funds way faster." He closed the laptop, said nothing, but that night, he didn't sleep. Not because he was hurt, but because in that moment he realized he had been living to prove something, proving that he was worthy of her, of his co-workers, of those who had always indirectly told him someone else has already done it better. And then he began stepping away from the project, stopped signing up for workshops, stopped sharing his ideas, stopped feeling the excitement that once made him fully alive. This isn't just hurt. It's a kind of control through comparison, quiet, familiar, and deeply dangerous. They don't need to shout in your face that you're not enough. They just need to mention someone else right when you need to be seen. And just like that, you shrink yourself. You pull your belief out of your own hands. You turn all your effort into a gift, waiting for someone else's permission to feel proud. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What amazes me most is this. We love ourselves more than anyone else, yet we care more about other people's opinions than our own thoughts." And that is the saddest truth, when you no longer feel confident in yourself unless someone else nods in approval. Stoicism doesn't teach you to shut the world out, but it teaches you to place your weight where it belongs, in action, not in praise. If you have to live by the standards of someone who doesn't live in your body, who doesn't know the pain you've endured, then you will always be chasing a stick that was never yours. Ask yourself, is there something you once felt proud of, but now feel embarrassed to bring up? A project you once believed in, but stepped away from, just because someone else seemed better at it? You don't have to be better than them. You just have to be real with yourself. And if someone always makes you feel not enough to be proud, then maybe they're the one lacking the strength to love someone who's growing. 3. They mock and envy your dreams, talents, and success. You talk about a new project with eyes lit up, a plan you've been thinking about all night, refining in silence, testing alone without telling anyone. And the first thing they do is laugh. Just a slight smirk, enough to make your heart sink. You'll just drop it like last time. They don't need to push your hand away. They only need to plant a line, sounding like a joke, but really a needle-sharp jab, just enough to pierce the belief you were trying to protect. They don't want you to fail. They just don't want you to succeed before they do. Deep down, they don't hate your dream. They just fear that if you make it, they'll have no way to deny that they themselves abandoned the path they once longed for. So, under the label of experienced, someone who cares, they find every way to cast a shadow over whatever light you've tried to kindle. First comes doubt, then sarcasm, and finally, silence when you succeed, but visible delight every time you stumble. I once had a close friend from university. We started everything together, the early projects, unshaped dreams, and all those embarrassing failures born from a lack of experience and faith. But when I chose a new path, a small project, something I believed could help others, I began to feel the shift. The first time I had a real client, I called him, my voice full of excitement like a child who just built his first tent. He replied, "Probably just luck." When I was invited to speak at a small workshop, he texted, "Sounds good, but you'll realize soon it's not for you." But the time I failed, lost the contract, lost money, lost confidence, he was the first to call, voice full of concern. "Told you so, but are you okay?" It seemed like he cared, but I knew he only felt at ease when I couldn't lift my head. At first, I thought I was too sensitive, but when it happened enough times, I realized he didn't want me to fail because he disliked me. He wanted me to fail so he wouldn't have to feel lesser. And that's a sweet kind of envy, never called by its name, but always there when it matters most. They'll say, "I just don't want you to live in fantasy." They won't tell you to stop. They'll just gently plant doubt into every step you take. And if you're not careful, you'll start living with a quiet fear. What if I'm being foolish? That's when you lose one of the most sacred rights of adulthood, the right to believe in yourself. Epictetus once wrote, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." You don't need to convince anyone that your dream is valid. You just have to live it, even in silence. Dreams don't need to be defended with arguments, only with faith. The faith that even if no one understands you now, it's still worth moving forward. The faith that what you're planting doesn't need applause, only your steady hand to water it each day. The faith that the child inside you, the one who used to dream without fear, is still waiting for you to choose them again. Because if you don't protect your dream like it's a living, breathing being, don't expect others to do it for you. Maybe you've heard the same words I've heard. At your age, still dreaming? If you're good, do it. Don't talk. Sounds grand, but is it practical? But if those words make you go silent, then you've just let someone else define how worthy your dream is. And slowly, you'll lose the quiet freedom of someone brave enough to live truthfully. If you've ever had a dream that was laughed at, a success that was dismissed, or a friend who made you doubt yourself, share that moment below. Just one sentence is enough to declare, "I still believe." And if you're still building something in silence, don't forget to write one word, "still building," as a promise to yourself that you won't give up. 4. They dismiss your pain and only complain about their own. You've just gone through something difficult, not loud or dramatic, but big enough to leave a crack in your mind. Maybe it was a loss, maybe a broken relationship, a dream that just fell apart, and so you try to find someone to share it with, someone to listen, so you don't have to carry that pain alone. But the other person, instead of sitting in silence and being there, looks at you and says, "I've been through that too, but way worse." You try to share what you've been holding in your chest, but they've already turned the story toward themselves and left you alone with what you didn't even get to say. And the strange thing is, the more time you spend around them, the more afraid you are to speak honestly, afraid to complain, afraid to seem weak, afraid of being the one who always talks about their problems, even though all you're trying to do is be heard, to just show up as you are in a moment where you don't want to have to pretend. This is a very common form of emotional manipulation. Pain, stealing. They don't deny your sadness, they just make it smaller by placing it next to the supposedly bigger sadness of their own. They don't have to prove that you're wrong, they just need to make you feel like you're asking for too much. I once heard the story of a woman named Rachel who lost her mother after months of caregiving. At the funeral, she nearly broke down, not from sudden loss, but from the exhaustion she'd been holding back for too long. She called her closest friend, someone who'd been with her since high school, someone she had shared everything with. But as soon as she mentioned her mother, her friend cut in, "Yeah, I get it. I lost both my parents in just 2 months. It felt like I was drained dry." Rachel said she didn't say another word for the rest of that call, not because her friend was cruel, but because she knew there was no room for her pain. She just stayed silent, listening to the other end go on, and worse than the loss itself was the feeling of being erased from her own story. There are relationships where you're not allowed to be sad, because the other person always has to be the center. There are people for whom every conversation leads in one direction, themselves. Whether you speak of pain, dreams, failure, or helplessness, it will always be turned into a bigger, deeper, more deserving version of their own. You won't notice it right away, but over time you'll start to shrink yourself, start self-censoring, start forcing a smile when you want to cry, start bracing up when you really need to lean. And at some point, you'll start to believe, maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Maybe I'm supposed to be stronger. Maybe my sadness is selfish. Stoicism never encouraged whining, but Stoicism also never told us to be numb to real pain. Epictetus once reminded us, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we may listen more and speak less." Listening is a moral act, but it's also a test. Who is worthy of your opening up? You weren't born to be a mirror for someone else's misfortune. No one should use you as a comparison point for their more tragic, more heroic, more painful story. Pain is not a competition, and anyone who makes you fight for empathy was never really walking beside you. If someone can't sit still when you cry and only waits for their turn to speak, then maybe that's not a relationship. It's a stage, and you're just playing the role of the audience. Choose your listeners carefully. Not everyone deserves to hold the deepest parts of you, and not everyone who's there when you need them is truly present. 5. They break promises or treat commitments lightly. They say they'll come, but the moment they say it, you already find yourself smiling awkwardly, not out of happiness, but because you know they'll forget again. You still nod, still set out a chair, still keep your schedule clear, but inside, you're already bracing for the unspoken truth, yet another broken promise. Every broken promise is a small crack, not loud, not instantly painful, but it slowly wears down your trust. It turns you into the one who has to patch together the plans, the hopes, and even your own emotions, just to avoid being too sensitive or too rigid. But really, you're just trying to save yourself from the sting of being left behind. One more time. I once heard a story that stayed with me ever since. A 7-year-old boy, excitedly waiting for his dad to pick him up for his first school performance, where he'd be singing his favorite song, solo. His father said, "I'll be there tomorrow night. Promise." The boy stood backstage, refusing to change into his costume, his eyes glued to the door at the back of the auditorium. The teacher had to coax him for a long time before he finally stepped onto the stage, but his voice cracked throughout, not from nerves, but because he realized the person he most wanted to sing for wasn't coming and wouldn't come. When he got home, the father said, had a meeting. No apology, no embrace, just an empty sentence, as if it would all blow over. And it did. It passed, but it never disappeared. It stayed inside that child's heart like a quiet punctuation mark, a reminder that even the promises spoken with one's eyes can be treated carelessly. That boy never blamed his father afterward, but he also never invited him to another show again. He learned how to walk to places alone, taught himself to play music, practiced his voice on his own, and eventually became a calm, independent young man who seemed like he needed no one. But there was one thing no one saw. Every time someone promised to show up, his eyes would flicker with a flash of caution. Not because he hated promises, but because he had grown used to them not being kept. At first glance, it looks like strength, but deep down, it's a kind of wound turned into a habit, because not everyone who's strong chose to be. Sometimes, they just got tired of waiting too many times. People who break promises aren't always malicious, but they carry a dangerous habit. They mistake your patience for permission. They see you still there, still kind, still forgiving, and they assume you're okay. They assume an apology is enough. They assume you're used to it. Epictetus once wrote, "A good character is not formed in a week or a month. It is created little by little, day by day." Commitment isn't about grand declarations. It's the small actions, done consistently, that let someone believe. And real trust doesn't come from pretty words. It comes from someone still showing up when they could have stayed away. If someone makes you write a plan B every time you believe in them, then maybe it's time to stop making plans and start designing an A life, where you don't have to wait, don't have to guess, don't have to settle for less, just to preserve a relationship that's slowly wearing out. You don't have to hate the one who broke the promise, but you do have the right to take back the trust you placed in the wrong hands. That's not revenge. It's a way of protecting the quiet dignity within you. The last time you trusted someone got hurt, did you forgive them? Or have you been forgiving yourself for trusting too much? If that question brings up a name in your mind, leave a single dot under this video. No need to explain. 6. They only come when they need something and disappear when you do. Some people vanish from your life for months at a time without a word. No birthday message, no encouragement. But then one random afternoon, they call. Familiar voice, a few shallow questions, then straight to the point. Got time lately? Can you help me with something? Do you know anyone at the bank? Can you send me their contact? Can you advance me some money? I'm stuck right now. And you go silent. Not because they're asking, but because of how they re-enter your life like they never left. As if the silence before meant nothing. As if you had an obligation to be ready. Daniel, a software engineer living alone in Seattle, once found himself in that exact place. Quiet and kind, he often helped old friends when they needed computer repairs, photo edits, connections, or resume rewrites. Even though they didn't talk often, he thought, staying in touch is a good thing. Until one day, Daniel got into a minor car accident and had to stay in the hospital for a week. Not wanting to bother anyone, he still sent a message in the old friend group chat. "I'm in the hospital right now. Just wanted to let you all know." No one replied. Daniel didn't get angry, didn't complain. He simply reclassified the relationship in his mind. This isn't a friend. This is someone with temporary access. After that, he stopped replying to every request. Not out of selfishness, but because he realized kindness is not a free service, and generosity needs the right place to land. Some people don't manipulate with threats, but with old familiarity. They lean on memories, on the label of family, old friends, to conveniently ignore any emotional responsibility in the present. When they need something, you're the center. When you're in pain, they disappear. Not because they're busy, but because you're no longer useful to them. And this doesn't just happen in small circles. Taylor Swift, one of the most successful and influential artists in America, once shared in Miss Americana, "I used to think people really liked me, but it turns out they only needed me when I was rising. When I fell, no one called." After the Kanye West microphone grab incident at the 2009 VMAs, many peers, people who had worked with Taylor, stayed silent. No defense, public support. But when she came back, shining with the success of albums like 1989 and Reputation, they reappeared beside her like nothing had ever happened. Taylor didn't just survive, she transformed. She stopped trying to please everyone, stopped holding on to one-sided relationships just to avoid being called cold. In a live show, she once said, "I want to be known for what I love, not for trying to keep people who were never really there." And Seneca once said, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you." And that doesn't mean they have to help you all the time, but that they show up even when there's nothing to gain. Someone who truly cares for you stays, not just when you're strong, but when you have nothing left to give. You don't have to resent people who only show up when they need something, but you do have the right to revoke that privilege, just like Daniel did. You have the right to ignore a call when you know it's just a repeat of the same cycle of ask, take, then disappear. Learn to distinguish who comes for you and who comes for their own need. When you master that, you don't grow cold. You just grow less vulnerable. And your kindness, instead of being wasted, will find its place in a heart that knows how to hold it. Is there someone in your life who only calls when you have something to give? 7. You feel drained every time you see them. They manipulate you through duty and obligation. People often manipulate with sweet words, but family, friends, the closest relationships often manipulate with something subtler: responsibility. Sometimes the exhaustion you feel around someone doesn't come from what they say. It comes from what they make you believe. If family can't help each other, then what's the point? It's not just a sentence, it's an invisible rope that tightens around your chest every time you want to say no. It ties you to the role of the good child, the considerate sibling, the reliable friend. And so, you stay, not out of love, but out of fear of being called ungrateful or cold. Logan, a 42-year-old man living in Arizona, had lived this way since he was 23. He once paid off his father's debts, signed a house lease for his sister after her divorce, even passed on a job transfer opportunity to take care of his mother. At first, it was voluntary, but then it became expected. At every gathering, he was the one who paid, who arranged things, who cleaned up. No one asked if he was okay. No one knew he had once called off an engagement, partly because his family made his fiancée feel like an outsider. Logan didn't blame anyone. He was just tired, a kind of tiredness with no name. Until one night, at 2 a.m., the phone rang. His sister called, her voice frantic. "Logan, can you transfer me $5,000? I'm about to be kicked out of my new place, and I haven't got the deposit yet." Logan had just gotten home after a 12-hour shift, his body aching, eyes burning from deadlines, dishes still stacked in the sink. He sat down, speaking slowly. "I can't help you, Ash." "Why not?" she asked. Logan paused, then exhaled heavily. "I just pulled out of an investment and lost nearly everything. I honestly have nothing left right now." Silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then the reply came, not loud, but colder than he expected. "So, when I need you, you've got nothing for me." Logan didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the yellow light in his old kitchen, the same place where he'd hosted so many Thanksgiving dinners for the whole family, alone. And that was the moment he realized, when family keeps asking and never checking if you have anything left to live on, it's no longer family. It's a loan contract, no due date, no emotion, and if you can't pay, you're at fault. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You always retain the option of having no opinion. There is never a need to feel rushed." In a world where people constantly push you to have a stance, have a responsibility, make a promise, the wisest thing might be to hold on to your right, to say no, no speaking, no emotional debt, no doing just to keep an image. Help only when your heart truly wants to. But if you're only doing it because you fear being seen as small, as wrong, as selfish, as uncaring, then that's not responsibility, that's captivity. The most powerful action isn't helping, it's knowing when to stop. Write down the name of someone who's draining you, not because they're bad, but because you've stayed too long, with too little returned. Then try, just once, to draw a boundary. Refuse a small request. Don't over-explain. Don't armor your emotions. And watch closely. If you're no longer useful, do they still show up in your life? If you've ever hesitated to say no, just because you were afraid to hurt someone, leave a single below the video. No need to explain, just a gentle reminder to us all. Sometimes, one simple no can save your dignity. 8. The one who constantly stirs conflict and forces you to pick sides. One of the most subtle forms of manipulation is when someone pulls you into a battle that isn't yours, then demands that you take their side. They tell you about their conflict with someone else, voice full of frustration, then ask with an innocent-looking glance, "Whose side are you on?" Not to get your opinion, but to measure your loyalty. And if you choose silence, or worse, choose neutrality, that glance changes. You're no longer the close friend, you're the traitor sitting in the audience. Alyssa once had a close friend from 6 years, working at the same company. Her name was Claire. They had shared everything, from the fatigue of work to quiet heartbreaks. Until one day, Claire had a falling out with a co-worker named Rachel. She told Alyssa every detail, voice burning with anger. "She doesn't respect me at all. Who do you think is right?" Alyssa listened, but only replied, "I wasn't there when it happened, so I think it's best not to judge." The answer made Claire go silent. A few days later, Alyssa found herself removed from their group chat. And in a team meeting, Claire said aloud, "Some people clearly don't understand what friendship means." No names, but enough for Alyssa to know. In her best friend's eyes, she had failed, just because she didn't take a side. That day, after the meeting, Alyssa sat alone in the office. She wasn't angry, just empty. In a room full of people, she suddenly realized she was sitting on the outskirts of a friendship she once called safe. It wasn't the first time she chose silence, but it was the first time she was judged for it. That's how those afraid of loneliness manipulate you with conflict. They can't stand being alone in the fight, so they need allies. The more loyal, the better. Neutrality in their eyes is betrayal, but in truth, it's their own deep insecurity that makes them feel only those who agreed deserve to stay. Your neutrality threatens them, not because you're wrong, but because it forces them to face something. Maybe they're not entirely right. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." You don't need to explain that you're a good person. Just live like one. And a good person doesn't always need to choose a side. Sometimes, the greatest strength is in staying silent, in stepping out of a battle where you weren't present, have nothing to gain, and lack full understanding, even when someone tries to drag you in. Silence isn't a lack of responsibility. It's a form of respect for both sides. Silence doesn't make you weak. It places you beyond the reach of others' control. Courage doesn't lie in shouting your stance, but in knowing when not to speak at all. If you've ever been forced to take sides, try stopping, not to protect someone else, but to protect yourself. Write down a name, someone who once pulled you into their conflict. Then ask yourself, do I really want to keep a relationship where neutrality is treated as betrayal? If the answer is no, then you've found a new kind of freedom. Freedom from a fight that was never yours. Have you ever been hated just because you chose to stay silent between two people who wouldn't listen to each other? 9. They hurt you, but make you apologize. They speak harshly, say things that break you down, and then it's you who ends up apologizing. Not because you were wrong, but because you want to keep the peace. You want to end the tension. You want the relationship not to fall apart. And over time you learn to take the blame, even when deep down you know the one who got hurt was you. Ethan once believed he was a strong man, but in a marriage that lasted nearly 10 years, what exhausted him most wasn't the work or even financial arguments. It was the quiet wars, where he always ended up backing down after every disagreement. There were no shouting matches, no explosive fights, just frozen silence, days of cold distance, and phrases like, "I'm not mad at you, I'm just disappointed." Each time, Ethan felt like a criminal, not for anything specific, but for the sense that he'd broken something sacred. So he apologized, even when sometimes he was the one who'd been disrespected. It's a familiar tactic, emotional manipulation through victimhood. The other person doesn't need to say, "I'm right, you're wrong." They just need to look sad, disappointed, or stay silent long enough until you begin to feel guilty on your own. They make you believe your emotions are excessive, that your pain is inconvenient. That speaking up is what damages the relationship, and so you hold it all in. Or if you do speak up, you become the one who has to take it back, apologize, clean up the emotional mess that was never allowed to exist. Epictetus once wrote, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." How can you be free if even your emotions must pass through the filter of apology? If every time you feel sad, angry, or disappointed, instead of being understood, you're burdened with something else, the guilt of not being in control. Stoicism doesn't teach us to suppress emotion. It teaches us to master it and to clearly recognize what's suffocating it. If you've ever apologized just to keep the peace, try writing down the last time it happened. Then ask yourself, did I apologize because I was wrong or because I was afraid they'd stop loving me? When you can tell the difference, you'll start to see the boundary. And when the boundary is clear, freedom begins. Starting today, practice drawing that line. What is a real mistake, and what is manipulation through silence, sad eyes, or the victim act that makes you feel like the one who caused the pain? You don't need to apologize for your honest emotions. You only need the clarity to not let anyone convince you that having feelings is a crime. Have you ever felt guilty just for expressing your pain? If you've ever had to apologize in a fight where you were the one who got hurt, leave the words, "I'm here," in the comments, so you'll remember you are not alone. 10. You've forgiven many times, but never healed. They hurt you, they apologize, you forgive, then they hurt you again, and again, you stay silent. Over and over, the cycle repeats until one day, you can't even cry anymore. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because the wound has become part of your skin. It doesn't bleed, but it dulls you. Light as if nothing's left, but deep as if nothing could be saved. Lena is a woman in her 30s, independent, successful, well-loved by her colleagues. But there's one thing she's never dared to say out loud: the quiet wounds from her own mother. Her mother never hit her, never yelled. She just criticized. Why don't you dress more neatly? With legs like that, you're wearing a skirt. Other girls your size know how to hide it better. After every comment, her mother would say, "I'm just doing this for your own good." And Lena would forgive. The first time, she was just 10, and her mother mocked her hair, saying it looked like a bird's nest. She cried, but her mother said, "I say this because I love you." And from that moment on, Lena learned to suppress every reaction, afraid to make her mother sad. As a child, because she believed her mother was right. As a teen, because she feared upsetting her. As an adult, because she thought she should be forgiving. But strangely, the more forgiving she became, the more she withdrew. Until one day, she stopped telling her mother anything. No more stories about her boyfriend. No more talks about work. Every call became small talk or a forced smile. Forgiveness was no longer an act of love. It became a cold armor, keeping her from expecting anything anymore. Forgiveness without change only reopens the same old wound, not with fresh blood, but with deeper silence. An apology, if meant just to soothe but not to change, becomes a form of control. It's how people keep you around, holding on to your sympathy, making you think they didn't mean to. But not meaning harm doesn't mean no harm was done. And if harm keeps repeating, the answer isn't to forgive again, it's to step back and begin to heal. Epictetus once said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Life will always bring wounds, but how you respond determines whether you survive or live forever with that pain. To forgive once is generous. To forgive 10 times without change is to poison yourself with a faith that's already decayed. If you've ever forgiven too much, try writing down a name. Someone who, after every apology, kept doing the same thing. Then ask yourself, am I forgiving or just getting used to the pain? If you realize you no longer expect them to change, that's the moment you need to change. Step back, not to punish, but to stop the bleeding, to stop living in a house of emotions where every wall is built from silent endurance. You deserve to heal, not because you're not angry, but because you've become clear enough to stop trapping yourself in that cycle. You've just walked with me through 10 signs that may seem invisible, but when they build up over time, they quietly strip away your trust, your worth, and your right to simply be yourself. Not everyone you need to cut off is a bad person. Many of them were once where you found comfort, but love is not a medal you keep wearing, even after it rusts. A right relationship should be a place where you're heard, respected, healed, and allowed to grow. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to be cold or heartless. It only shows you this: true love doesn't begin with holding on to others, but with holding on to yourself. Forgiveness without change is just a loop. Silence without understanding is just surrender. And if every time you walk away from someone you feel smaller, then maybe you've stayed too long. Remember, you have no obligation to stay in a relationship just to avoid being judged. You don't need anyone's permission to walk away. If this video touched something inside you, share it, so someone else might also find the courage to say something that sounds simple, but takes years to speak aloud. I deserve kindness, and I am strong enough to walk away, even if my feet still tremble.